Dr. Molefi Asante explained very carefully why African Americans would use the term brother and sister. Because at the end of the system of enslavement, the legal phase, when Africans were then able to walk the country and they would see another African and they would say, brother, sister. Because they're asking the question, are you the one that was sold from me? Are you the person that I may have known when I was 5 years old that was sold onto another plantation? So when we use brother and sister, we don't use it in a racial way. We use it in a cultural, historical way, because the person coming from Trinidad that I just met today could be related to me. That is a crime, that this person who could be my family, I don't know. And right now, we could be related to each other and don't know. Now, you may think that's not a big deal until you study African culture. Then when you study African culture, you will know that knowing your family, knowing your background was key to Africa. That is why if you talk to people of the older generation, you know, my mother, if I introduce my mum to somebody, she always say to me, what is their name? She doesn't necessarily know that's part of our tradition, that that's how we ground ourselves, even in Jamaica still. What is your name? Because when we get your name, now we can ground you in your family history. So we say, okay, yes, that's good people, because we know your history. History is alive and well, but you've got to utilize it for what it is. Ultimately, we're going to talk about power. Sister Esther made a very important statement. I'm going to link that to something that Kamani spoke about earlier in regards to the Haitian Revolution. Power. One of the reasons why Haiti was impoverished was because the French, you see, you can understand the psychology. Toussaint Louverture died in the prisons of the French. Why? Because he still had a slave mentality. He didn't realize you couldn't trust the French. So he got on a ship, went to France, they put him in prison, and he died. Because he didn't understand who he was and who the French were at that time. What am I saying here? Reparations. Many people laugh at reparations. But do you realize that when the Haitians succeeded in defeating those great superpowers, that because they didn't have a true knowledge of self, because the right people weren't in power, they committed themselves to pay reparations to the French for enslaving us? Do you know that when the enslavement process in the Caribbean, Jamaica specifically, was ended, that the planters were paid reparations and money back for ending the so-called system of enslavement? So why is it when we talk about it that all of a sudden we're militants? I want you to understand one thing. I am not a militant. I'm somebody grounded in my own history, and therefore don't label me. We're not militants. If you mean militant as in military, I'm not coming as a military person, but what I am coming with is a truth that will impact you according to where you place yourself. So if I speak the truth and it hurts you, and I haven't meant to do that, then you have to look at yourself. Because it makes you feel uncomfortable because you've never positioned yourself in the right place. I am both a victor and a victim in this story, but I refuse to be a victim. So I've been victimized, but I'm not a victim. Because what I'm here to do today is to begin a process of outlining the trauma. The trauma that disconnected you from Mali, Ghana, and Songhai, and the glory of Timbuktu. The trauma that occurs when you don't know that. When all you know is that you're a nigger with attitude. You don't get niggers with attitude unless you have the system of enslavement. The fact that people from the Caribbean who never had a history of talking, referring to themselves as niggers, as a community, on a community level, the reason why we do this today is because sections of our community are elevated and amplified, their thinking is amplified, so that it becomes part of the cultural fabric of African people. So when I went to Ghana, for example, one brother, he referred to me as nigger. I said, what are you saying? He said, but isn't that how you refer to yourself? So I had to explain to the brother, I didn't get angry, I had to explain to him that is one section of African American culture that has been amplified and highlighted for political reasons. I am not a nigger. The nigger is the social construction of the slave plantation world. And I wouldn't care if 1,000 people told me that we can reverse the word and change the meaning, and if I say neggers with an A, it's not the same as niggers. I'm not a nigger whether you say it with I or whether you say it with an A. I'm an African man, and I'm proud of it. So what I'm trying to say here is that you cannot be confused when you see the behavior of people that are disconnected from their history and their culture. Because what you have is an acknowledgement that without a strong identity, you cannot function fully within your social environment. The key thing to understand, for me, in a book called Civilizational Barbarism by Sheikh Anta Diop, he outlines 3 important factors. He outlines history, the linguistic factor, and the psychological factor. And he says that without all of these 3 things functioning, you become a population. So in other words, when he was looking at African people, he said that you've got to have your history, you've got to have your language, and you've got to have a psychology that tells you that you're African. Without that, you become a population. A population is the same as calling yourself male. There's a difference between a male and a man. Male is biological. Female is biological. Man and woman is a socio-cultural and political entity. They have an identity and they act in a particular way. But when you just talk biology, you're talking about the lowest level of development. In many ways, people of African descent, many of us have become a population, not a people. Why? Because in order for you to become a people, you've got to know your history. Your history will wed you to what has happened before, what you're doing now, and what will occur in the future. So for example, Brother Minister Malcolm X was Malcolm Little before he gained the knowledge of self. He was Malcolm Little who engaged in criminal activity. But then you can say, you see, if you disconnect Malcolm Little from what happened to his family, his father was a Garveyite. His mother was a Garveyite. She was the secretary of the Garveyite movement. So in the context of his family, he was taught a knowledge of who he was via the teachings of Marcus Garvey. But then, how did he become Malcolm Little, Detroit Red? How did he become this man, or Red, as they called him in Harlem? He became that man because, 1, the Ku Klux Klan attacked his family home. 2, his father was killed. And 3, because his family was disconnected. It was traumatized. And without the strength of his family and his culture, he degenerated into Malcolm Little. Somebody who did not have an understanding of who he was in the broader context. And that happened not by accident, it happened based on the institutional forces that destroyed his family. But that's a metaphor. That's a metaphor. You know, parents are supposed to protect their children. That is their role. Function male and female. Now imagine, you're on a slave plantation. You're a man. Here you have children. Somebody comes and they take your children. They sell them or they rape them. See, when I speak, I like to deal with the reality. Because until you deal with the reality, you won't understand what's going on right now. Understand that African children, you see, if you watch Roots or you look at some of the things that we put out there, you know, it will show the rape of women. That's a tiny aspect of it. What about the rape of children? What about male and female children used as bed warmers? It's true. Children. So imagine in this society right now, if somebody has a sexual relationship with a child, we would name them a paedophile. But what do you do about that in the system of enslavement? Where you had no rights, nobody to protect you. And I'm not just talking females, I'm talking males. I'm also talking the rape of black men in order to belittle them both psychologically and physically. That's why I don't even want to go there, so I'm going to be lightweight. I'll be lightweight. I don't want to go there today. But what I'm trying to tell you is we haven't scratched the surface. Even those of us who think we're scholars in this haven't touched it. Just about 4, 5, 6 months ago, I was reading something where they were talking about in America, where after they stopped bringing Africans from the continent, they developed these farms where they took men and women, men who were related to women, so incest, and they forced the men to make babies and the women to make babies in order to keep the numbers up because they couldn't bring people from Africa. So they encouraged incest among African people. We never dealt with that. Even me, who studied, I didn't know that, and it was in Maryland. I didn't know this. And I've studied this area. So what I'm trying to say is that there was an inculcation of sickness into the African family. In fact, as I often say, the African family in many ways did not exist for centuries. Because you can't have a family if my child can be taken from me and used sexually by somebody else or sold on. I don't have a family. I'm not saying that we didn't have the relationship. What I'm saying is with that level of instability, you're going to have psychological, physical trauma. I'm talking about trauma here that we've never healed from, right? And one of the reasons why we don't want to look at this subject because it makes us uncomfortable. It's painful, but you've got to deal with the pain. You've got to get past the pain, past the anger, because that's part of the healing. The solution for many people of African descent is to say, I don't want to hear about that, that's back then. That is a person who's sick, because what they know inherently that there is a problem, but they're running away from the problem, believing that somehow they've escaped the pain. You're not an ostrich. You know, when an ostrich is chased and it's scared, it buries its head in the sand and leaves the rest of it there, thinking that somehow it's safe. You cannot run like the ostrich. You're living in a time where this information must be used strategically as a form of healing. Now, what is the point I really want to make here? My point here is that we haven't even begun the study of the subject matter. Why is it, for example, that people from the Caribbean, let's say Jamaica, you know, Jamaicans are very strident, powerful people, big talk, say it go. That's us, right? But look at the diet we have. Because I don't want to offend anyone from Jamaica. I'm going to go African American now. Soul food diet. Soul food, high blood pressure, heart disease, dying before you're 50 and you're 60, swearing by your soul food. You from Jamaica, you jerk this, you jerk that, pig foot. Don't even start with Trini. What am I saying? Because we're laughing at it, but I'm saying it for a specific reason. I'm telling you that the foods and the diet that you inculcate or was inculcated in the Caribbean was based on slave food. the slave masters would find the cheapest food that they could give you. They gave you the scraps, and you took the scraps and you molded it into food that you